Today's sermon title is called Backstabber. Does everybody have a big smile when they hear that? No? Okay. It's called Backstabber. That's a great sermon title, isn't it? Backstabber. Actually, I think it's a great title because it probably connects with you. You probably right away in your mind have a time where somebody got after you. Or maybe a time where you did somebody else wrong. Backstabber. That's the sermon title. King David had this experience that I thought it maybe would intrigue you and it would have some value for teaching. It's probably not a common sermon topic. I'm going to talk about betrayal today. Betrayal. That's probably not the most common thing people preach on the day after Thanksgiving or the Sunday after. Give me a chance, we'll get there. It may be that some of you have dealt with this in your past. Maybe it's still there haunting you right now. You've experienced betrayal in your life. And some of you, just the story alone, the mercy that God showed in the situation, the way that God worked with David, maybe that alone will preach something to you. Really my goal with going through this story, and it's a dark story, man. We're going to laugh about some dark things pretty quick here, but my goal about sharing this story is not like to depress you or bring you to a negative place. Actually, I want to teach you how to respond when people do dark, dark things to you. What would God have you do? What can we learn about this? So 2 Samuel 16, go to verse 5. 2 Samuel 16, and then we're going to go to verse 5. As King David approached Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out from there. Remember, Saul is no longer the king. David has taken over the position. Saul has taken his own life. There's a lot of bitterness here. Saul's clan has had some failure. His name was Shimei, son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out. He pelted David and all the king's officials with stones, though all the troops and the special guard were at David's right and his left. As he cursed Shimei, he said, get out of here, you murderer, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord has given the kingdom in the hands of your son, Absalom. You have come here and ruined because you're a murderer. Then check this out. Then Abishai's son of Zeruiah said to the king, why should this dead dog curse the Lord, my king? Let me go over and cut off his head. Now I don't know if you've got a real best friend, but if your best friend wouldn't do this for you, they're not your best friend. This is like serious friendship. Did you say something about my boy? I'll cut your head off right now. I will cut you. That's a good friend. And David's keeping him out of a fight here, okay? But the king said, what does this have to do with you, sons of Zeruiah? If he's cursing because the Lord said to curse David, who can ask, why do you do this? This is an odd response from David. David said to Abishai and all his officials, my son, my own flesh and blood is trying to kill me. How much more than this Benjamite? Leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore me to his covenant blessing instead of a curse today. Well, that is interesting. Let's pause right there for a second. It's a strange way to respond, especially for those of you who know anything about David at all. You're like, David, this guy is letting somebody talk down to him? That's incredible. As a boy, David killed wild animals with a child's toy. He did. That's the wild man that he was. With a child's toy, he killed wild animals. When a giant opposed God's people, when Goliath came against God's people, David's sling was still swinging. He wasn't done yet. And as a young man, check this one out. This one's so weird in the scripture. As a young man, when Saul dies, one of Saul's groups celebrates too early. Do you guys remember this? He celebrates too early. He didn't grieve the death of Saul, which was a righteous position. It was a godly position. And David said, kill that guy. Well, do not celebrate too early around David, apparently. But he's an intense figure. And so you hear those things and you try to contrast it with a guy who's letting someone whip stones at him. Like David, the stone slinger, kills giants, and here's somebody walking up to him throwing stones. And David takes it. In fact, it's weird. He almost encourages it and accepts it. Now we have to understand that David, just because he was used by God, didn't have perfect theology. Not everything that David says or does is perfect. Amen? Everybody understand that? The Bible is not a record of perfect events. If you think that, you haven't read it. The Bible is a record of broken humanity and a perfect God running into each other. So often, that's what we're seeing. So this guy is yelling at David, and he's calling David a murderer, and it's actually true. I don't know what God's thing is with murderers. You got Moses, he kind of killed a guy once. David, he sort of killed a guy. You see, David was having an affair once, and to escape how bad it looked, he sent the husband of this woman into a battle where he would surely die. He didn't protect him. But God calls him out. You know, God's vision is really good. Has anybody ever felt before like, man, God's eyes are on me. That guy is seeing what I'm up to. Come on, somebody. You felt his eyes before. And not just in a critical sense, in a sense of like, let me help you up. You're caught. Come out of the woodwork here. So God calls him out in this affair, in this murder. And when David finally fesses up to the crime, he's talking to a prophet of God. The prophet of God, who is there holding him accountable, explains to him that he's going to reap what he has sowed. Now, usually, people in the Old Testament, they just get down on their knees and they beg and they cry out to God, they repent, and that's like, it's a real changing point. And God does forgive David. David is still the king, but God says something unique. God says, there are going to be consequences. You're going to reap what you sowed. You're going to reap what you sowed. The prophet says it this way. The sword will never depart from the house of David. It's a clever way of saying the standard for betrayal that you just set has now infected people. You have set the tone. The atmosphere of betrayal is abounding. It's because of you. And now even amongst your own household, somebody's going to rise up against you. Which was very common for kings in the old days. You know, it's almost a terrifying thing to be a king in the old days, because people's children, if they didn't liquidate their children would come back and take care of them, overthrow them. And they had so much peace. They had this moment of peace, and then things start to fall apart for David when he's in sin. So God is once again working through consequences. Now you'll notice something, and I like to try to teach on this a little bit if you'll hear me clearly. A lot of times what the Bible calls a curse is best understood as consequences. That's the best way to understand it. So often we resort to magical, well, it seems like magic when you're in it. When you're inheriting the consequences of your actions, it sure seems like magic. Like, God, how did you know this was going to happen? Consequences, man. It's pretty natural. It's still God. It's not less supernatural. It's still God. You know, sometimes when I think about David and the things that he was up to, I think of him as the guy, he would be pulled over on the side of the road with a car that's not working every once in a while. David is the guy who drives the car and like all the dashboard lights are on. They're flashing at him. They're warning him. Some of you were laughing because you were that person. They're flashing at him, and he's like, well, okay, he just keeps driving. Dude, pull over. Pop the hood. Take a look inside. I wish we would all do that sometimes. So he has an affair. Think about this. He has an affair, missed the first red flag, with one of his best friends or best men's wives. She gets pregnant. He has the husband killed. He covers it up. He gets caught. He still takes the wife because it's the best of the bad things that he could do. And after all, she's a Hittite woman. If you know anything about the Old Testament, Israelites and Hittites were not supposed to get together because Hittite women worshipped secular gods or polytheist gods, other gods. Unashamedly. And so now David is bringing closer all these problems. He keeps bringing these problems into his life. And even false gods in a sense. Do you see how quickly the kings would turn over when they made these decisions? So poor David, his own son has risen up against him, and he's been chasing him to kill him, to divide God's people. Again, betrayal. 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 Have you ever been betrayed before? Come on, just give me the slow nod if you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. I've been betrayed. I remember, this is not my notes, but it's going to be a good story because it's not my notes. I remember when I was in high school, I sat down with somebody I really trusted, and I needed to have a conversation with them about something. I shared some really sensitive information that needed to stay between us. It didn't hurt anybody else. It wasn't like gossip. It wasn't that kind of conversation. It was very sensitive information. I shared it with them, and a couple days later, a friend walked up to me and shared everything that I had shared. And I did the 1,000-yard stare. You guys know what the 1,000-yard stare is? Come on, practice your 1,000-yard stare on me right now. Revenge is coming. First, I was angry. I was a little confused. And then I was really sad. I was really heartbroken. It's weird how betrayal, it just sends you through so many emotions. You betrayed me. And then you soften up a little bit because you're confused and you don't want it. You don't want the emotion. You betrayed me. And then the sadness can come in. You let me down. You betrayed me. Understand, David is a real person. He's a real human. He's going through the range of emotions with this betrayal. So Absalom, his son who's betraying him, goes and asks for advice of how to do it. How shall I overpower my father? How should I betray him? And so go to 2 Samuel chapter 16, verse 20. We're going to go to verse 20. Now there's a name in here. It's called Ahithophel. Everybody say Ahithophel. It's taken me like 35 times to get that right. I just want you to appreciate it with me. Ahithophel. I read that so many times. I looked it up online. I'm like consulting the Greek and Hebrew. And just, who says this right? Ahithophel apparently is the right way to say it. Verse 20. It says this. Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give us your advice. What should we do?" And Ahithophel answered, "Sleep with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you've made yourself obnoxious to your father, and the hands of everyone with you will be more resolute." Wow, man. That's dark. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Dark, dark, dark things going on. When I was reading this, I just had a thought, and I don't know if I'm right. I'm just thinking about it. I wonder if this was the same roof where David stood watching Bathsheba. I mean, if you really wanted to get after a guy, that's what you would do. In the same place where David really had his failure, where he betrayed one of his best men, now his son stands betraying him. In that same place. You know that your kids are watching you, Shannon? Can I just tell you something? Your kids are watching you. They're watching you. I know I'm calling you out. What do you mean? Yeah, the kids are watching you. And I'm glad that they're watching you. You're a great example. You love the Lord, and I really respect you. But do you know your kids are watching you? You know that? You know, your kids are learning your ways. Do you know that? Your kids are learning your ways. Well, some of you think, well, I'm an adult. I've grown up. They're still learning your ways. They're still learning your ways. Now, there's a sermon right there in that. Let me just ask you, what's your priority in life? What is the number one thing to you? Because it's the number one thing to your kids. They don't have to say it. They just learned it from you. So I wonder if this is the same roof that David, that woman, and never should have got involved with. So Absalom is doing this to completely dishonor David. It dishonors God as well, and it's family drama. Maybe after hearing this really dramatic story, you thought about your Thanksgiving meal or lunch or whatever, and it's just, your family doesn't seem so bad after all, huh? Because this is really complicated. Can I tell you guys my fun Thanksgiving story? Mary, should I tell them? I'm gonna, because I already started it. Here's my fun Thanksgiving story. Come on, it was funny. It was funny. I thought it was funny. So we're all eating, and I hear this automated speech sound. And it's not Alexa. Okay, now she's laughing. She knows it's funny. I know it wasn't Alexa. It wasn't the TV. And I look over at the person sitting next to me, and I see the outline of the phone in their pocket. And I'm looking at it, and the talking is coming from there. Now, if you didn't know this, your phone has this really neat little feature where you don't even have to hit the buttons, really. You don't have to type it in to call 911. Tony, did you know that? You don't have to. In fact, your leg can do it for you if you put your phone in unlocked. So I'm hearing sounds, I'm hearing automated speech, and then I hear a little emergency bleep. And I look down at the phone, and everybody's having a chummy time. Nobody else apparently hears it. I don't know, I'm Superman or something. I listen. I hear the bleep, and then I just hear this real faint, 911, what's your emergency? And I look down at the person, I'm like, your phone, you need to take your phone out of the pocket. The phone, take it out. Take your phone out of your pocket. Somebody's just talking. The person next to me takes up their phone, like, I call 911. Like, do we at least have gifts for them? Do we have food when they get here? Is there something we can give to them? The operator was so confused because all he hear is my son, Caleb, screaming in the background. And my brother-in-law, Sean, is like, no, it's not an emergency. Everything's fine. And the operator's like, baloney! They're screaming in the background. People are laughing. This is a confusing situation. I would not want to be that dispatch person that day. They're like, I don't know. They might have been getting murdered in the background. He convinced them, though. They never came. Emergency calls at Thanksgiving. Well, back to today's scripture. David put out an emergency call, but this one was very intentional. During this time, David puts out an emergency call, and it's not recorded in 2 Samuel. It's actually been added to the book of Psalms. It's one of the Psalms. Go to Psalms chapter 3 for me. Usually I don't have you guys jump around a whole lot, but we are jumping just a little bit. Psalms chapter 3. Just a few pages later. It's on page 760. We'll just see who that works on. Psalms chapter 3. And it's not on 760. I'm being mean. It's different in every Bible, just so you know. Okay, 760. That's where I'm at. Psalms chapter 3, and here's what it says. The little title says, a psalm of David when he fled from his son Absalom. Here was David's prayer. Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. But you, Lord, are a shield around me. My glory, the one who lifts my head high. I call out to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and I sleep, but I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not fear, though tens of thousands assail me on every side. Arise, Lord, deliver me, my God. Strike all my enemies in the jaw. Break the teeth of the wicked. From the Lord comes my deliverance. May your blessing be on your people. Go back to Samuel real quick. So I just want you to think about the situation. What's actually going on in real time here. As Absalom is raising, you know what? David is raising his voice to the Lord, and he's blessing God's people in the same breath. Israel, the God's people is about to be torn apart. They're going to be separated over this. It's dramatic. And instead of sending a curse, instead of speaking evil, instead of stabbing the back of the one who stabbed him, now he's just praying for deliverance. He's praying for God to intervene, for God's justice on the situation. In fact, he even ends it with a blessing. You know, a lot of times when I'm real ticked off, I don't know if a blessing is the first thing out of my mouth. I don't know if I'm so quick to lift my eyes to God. You know, I want to change. Greg, where you at? Greg, I want to change. Do you know what I'm talking about? I want to be the kind of person who is fast to the Lord. I run quickly to him, whether I've done good or bad. I want to run to him. But I'm going to be honest with you, Greg. Don't tell anybody else. I don't want them to know about this. Just between you and I right now, right? I think I have to change. It's not natural for me. It's not natural. So often, rage or the anger or the reaction is not holy. And I actually need God to get in my life and change me so that I would run to him quickly. Or maybe, I don't know if everybody else just listened in on that conversation that Greg and I were having privately, but I want to change. You know, the first step in wanting to change is like just confessing it. I think there's something that could be different in my life. I want to be the kind of person who runs to Jesus quickly when I have a problem. Even if I want to help somebody, I want something to go well, I want to run to Jesus first. I want to be that kind of person. I don't know about you guys. But now I'm going to have to skip ahead for the sake of time. I'm going to say this. One of David's own men, Ahithophel, has betrayed David and given advice to David's betraying son, Absalom. Absalom basically betrays Ahithophel, and Ahithophel sees the end is near. This man, who is renowned for good advice, it says that when David was king, everybody listened to Ahithophel's advice, and now Absalom is in his place, usurping his power. Everybody listens to him, except for this time, Ahithophel gets betrayed. There's just betrayal everywhere in the kingdom. If you didn't understand all that back and forth, everybody is doing everybody wrong. And it really seems to stem from when David didn't cover his eyes, didn't shield his eyes, didn't cover his heart, didn't protect himself. It draws a line back to that. It costs Ahithophel his life. And now this is a little bit of speculation. You can look into it if you want to. I kind of have an opinion about it, but a lot of the genealogies, if you read the genealogies, what you find out is Ahithophel is likely Bathsheba's grandfather. This is a network and a web of mess, man. This is terrible. Forget Netflix. You don't need to watch all that drama. It is right here in this story. You think your family is backwards, man. This is some backwards stuff right here. So there's going to be a battle between David's side and Absalom's side. David's men keep him back, though, because they recognize David is going to be the target. But Absalom has no wisdom, and he's out on the town by himself. He just goes. He's not hearing from God. He does it on his own. And just as a side note, before we get to this next scene, I want to tell you something. Before this battle, so David's going to stay back. Absalom's out running around doing who knows what. David stays back and he collects all his military leaders. And he says to them, the young man Absalom, please be gentle with him. Like, what? The guy's trying to kill you. Do you know what he's been up to? And David says, be gentle with him. I don't know if anybody's ever betrayed you before real severely, but I'm sure your response was not, God, be gentle with them. But David gives us little hints of the grace that we're going to find in the New Testament through Jesus. Very often, David represents things and character about Jesus. And in this case, there's a hint of it where David has this grace and he says, be careful, be gentle. Don't lay a hand on him. And he cares about his son, even though his son has betrayed him. But David also, he doesn't call him his son. He says the young man, Absalom. I think David has recognized that his child has grown up and he's doing the things he's doing. He's going to reap the consequences of what he's chosen to do. I just want to send a little relief. I just felt like God put this on my heart. For those of you who are parents, who have children, who have not really followed after you in pursuing the Lord, at a certain point, I know that you feel a responsibility. I know you want to protect them. I know you wish they would just be right there with you. But if they're not following the Lord, at a certain point, you have to recognize they're making their own decisions. And I don't want Satan to guilt you down about everything that they're up to. I don't want him to. You keep pursuing the Lord, and you let the children watch you and see your fervency and your passion for the Lord. Do not give up. Do not back down on this. Be consistent. Let the Lord use that in you. It's an incredible thing how David messes up big time, but then he really impresses me with his capability to also humble himself and do the right thing. So he wants to be gentle with an adversary. 2 Samuel 18, let's go to 18. And we'll go to verse 9 for the sake of time here. We're going to go to verse 9. Here's what it says. Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. That's not a good thing. It wasn't like they were hanging out for lunch. They ran into each other, and this was going to be battle. He was riding his mule, And as his mule went under a thick branch of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. And ever since I read that, I've got this stylish haircut that I wear right now. I've never been caught in a tree, ever. He was left hanging in midair while the mule kept on riding without him. When one of the men saw what would happen, he told Joab, "I just saw Absalom hanging in an oak tree." Joab said to the man who had told him this, "What? You saw him? Why didn't you strike him to the ground right there? Then I would have given you 10 shekels of silver and a warrior's belt." I love this in verse 12. Like, this is just a little tidbit that's included, and it's kind of funny. Verse 12, it says, "But the man replied, 'Even for 1,000 shekels, if they were weighed into my hands, I would not lay a hand on the king's son. In our hearing, the king commanded you and Abishai and Ittai, protect the young man Absalom for my sake. And if I had put my life in jeopardy and nothing was hidden from the king,'" like if you told him what I did, "you would have kept your distance from me." So he's saying, like, if I went and killed the king's son, and then the king found out, you would have been like, "I don't know that guy. He wasn't supposed to do that. He was the bad one." So this guy's smart. He recognizes, I'm not touching the king's son. Verse 14, Joab said, "I'm not going to wait for you like this." So he took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. Then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. They took Absalom and threw him into a big pit in the forest and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. Now check this out. This is trying to give you a little bit of an understanding of who is Absalom. Who did he become? In verse 18 it says, "During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the king's valley as a monument to himself. For he thought, 'I have no son to carry on the memory of my name.' He named the pillar after himself, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day." So Absalom, he is this type of person who had become so self-involved that he erected a tower to himself. And you can see why God would not bless him. God would not allow him to become the king. In fact, Solomon, his brother, would become the king. You can see the character that he had. He took some of that negativity from his father. He learned of his father's ways. And that pride is physically represented as this tower in the Valley of the King. In 2 Samuel 18:31, the story kind of finishes. 18:31. Somebody's got to go tell David what's happened, right? Who wants to be the bearer of great news, right? 18:31. Then the Cushite arrived and said, "My lord the king, hear the good news. The Lord has vindicated you today by delivering you from the hand of all those who rose up against you." The king asked the Cushite, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" The Cushite replied, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up against him to harm you be like that of the young man." The king was shaken. He went up to the room above the gateway, and he wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son, Absalom, my son, Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." I think every parent in this room, you understand exactly what he was saying. Even amongst all the drama, he wished, "Man, I wish it was me instead of you." The heartache, the pain of living through it is so difficult sometimes. Sometimes our children can seriously stress us out. Yeah. Eric says, "Just wait." I will. I will just wait. I need to close with this, and it says, it says that David went and he wept amongst the tower. This would be a really sad Bible story if it ended there. You know what I mean? Like there would be no redemption, no hope if it ended there. But the good news is, and we need some good news in the story, that this is not the end for David. David has not given up on God just because of this human failure. It was a tragic season of David's life. But David's life and his heart, it came from his pursuit of God. So one event did not ruin him. One betrayal did not ruin him. He continued serving the Lord. And speaking of the Lord, speaking of God, Jesus knew something about being betrayed, about having somebody go against you, wrong you. Jesus knew something about that. 1 Corinthians 11 says this. You don't have to turn there. I'll read it. 1 Corinthians 11:23. Paul says, "For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed." Jesus knows something about what it means to be betrayed. On the night he was betrayed, he took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it, and he said, "This is my body. I do this for you. And do this in remembrance of me." The same way after supper he took the cup, saying, "The cup, this is the cup of the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat of this bread and drink of this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." Jesus turned his betrayal into one of the greatest testimonies of all time. I wonder if we looked at, when people wrong us, when people go against you, when people hurt you, I wonder if you looked at that very dark thing and said, I wonder if God could turn this around somehow. I wonder if God would do it. Man, I think that would be a big thing for you. I think it would be a big thing for testimonies in your life. Today, if you didn't understand anything else at all, okay, understand this. Tragedy, a knife in the back, a falling out, a failure of a relationship, or a loss is not the end of your story if God is the one writing it. Amen. Let me say it again so it gets in here and in here. Somebody stabs you in the back. Somebody wrongs you. You have a falling out of a relationship. It's not the end. If God is in control. The problem is that we always want the pen back. We want to write the story. You guys know what I mean? Hold on, God. I'm really good at this. I think you're supposed to write in a Corvette right here. No, I'm really good at this. And just no debt. Somehow don't write that in there, God. Now, hold on. We always want the pen back, and that's where the problem comes. When we write our own stories and try to control every facet of our lives apart from the wisdom of God, we become like Absalom, making the tower unto ourselves that only becomes a sorry, selfish reminder of who we were. You guys know what I mean? I don't want to go to your funeral. First of all, I don't want to go to your funeral someday. I hope you live a long time. But I don't want to go to your funeral someday and have to try to find ways to make you seem like you cared about anybody else. I don't want to have to just think really critically of like, wow, when were they not selfish? You know what I mean? Let God write your story. When we give God the pen, he pens victories that were inked in his own blood. You guys understand what I'm saying? When we give it over to him, it's all about his death and resurrection in our life. And he writes in victories by the power of what he did on the cross. So today I want you to consider what it means to hand the pen back over to God, to trust him with writing your story, to obey and follow through. And if somebody today, maybe something here was real sensitive for you, maybe somebody wronged you in your life. What Jesus did on the cross when he was betrayed, it empowered you to forgive, to overcome. That was the end of it right there. I don't care if somebody does something to you next week. It's over. It's done. It's dealt with. Because God is the one who writes the story, and he writes victories. Give him your life. Would you stand with me?